Oh, wait a minute. What about double or nothing?
You run up to Boston and bring back some clam chowder for me and my daddy?
You're on.
You're on.
It was the second highest grossing film of 1977, beaten only by Star Wars. It made Burt Reynolds the biggest movie star on the planet, and today, most people under 40 have never seen it. This is Smokey and the Bandit, 1977, how the box office smash was forgotten.
Say what we did!
Yes, I did.
I want to jump something else! I want to jump our house! I want to jump something!
Oh, jump me.
Where the idea came from. The story of Smokey and the Bandit begins not in a studio office, but in a Georgia hotel room in 1976. Hal Needham was working as Burt Reynolds' stunt double on the set of Gator when a driver on the production brought several cases of Coors beer down from California.
So I wasn't worried about Smokey. The only thing, and I really wasn't this worried about it, but the only thing I wanted to make sure of was that I had all the coverage that I needed.
Needham noticed that the maid kept stealing bottles from his hotel room refrigerator, and the theft got him thinking about something he had read in a Time magazine article 2 years earlier. Coors beer was not pasteurized and therefore could not legally be sold east of the Mississippi River. In 1976, Coors was only available in 11 western and southwestern states. That regulatory quirk made a case of Coors a genuinely coveted object east of the line, a luxury item being transported across a legal border. Needham was a stuntman, not a writer, but he had an idea. He went back to his pool house. He had been living in Reynolds' pool house for 12 years, though the two barely saw each other given their schedules, and wrote the concept out on yellow legal pads. The premise was simple. Two men take on a bet to haul a truck full of Coors beer from Texarkana, Texas, to Atlanta, Georgia, in under 28 hours. One drives the truck. The other drives a fast car in front to act as a blocker, running interference with law enforcement. A relentless, furious Texas sheriff pursues them the whole way. Needham handed the yellow legal pads to Reynolds and told him if he could get the money, Reynolds would star. Reynolds read it, liked it, and agreed. His friends, by his own account in his autobiography, got down on their knees with tears in their eyes and begged him not to do it.
Yeah, I know that.
Getting the film made. Needham had no reputation as a director and no relationships with studio executives. He was known in the industry as one of the best stunt coordinators in the business, not as a filmmaker. Getting studios to take the project seriously was a fight. Producer Robert L. Levy came on board to help navigate the studio system, but the project still struggled to get through the door.
This was unfair competition, and there ought to be a law preventing the supermarket from selling these inexpensive mops, and my visceral reaction.
It was only after Reynolds' name was attached that Universal Pictures agreed to look at it seriously. Reynolds was at that point the #1 box office star in the world, a position he held for 5 consecutive years, beginning in 1978, though his star power was already enormous in 1977 when the film was being made. Universal bankrolled the film for $5.3 million. Then, 2 days before production was scheduled to begin in Atlanta, the studio sent what Needham described as a hatchet man to inform him that the budget was being cut by $1 million. With Reynolds already locked in at a salary of $1 million, Needham was now operating with $3.3 million to make the entire rest of the picture. He and assistant director David Hamburger spent 30 hours revising the shooting schedule to make it work. Principal photography took place primarily in Georgia, at the Lakewood Fairgrounds in Atlanta, in Jonesboro, in McDonough, and along various stretches of Georgia and Florida highway. with the landscape of the American South doing much of the visual work on a budget too lean for elaborate set construction. The screenplay went through development with writers James Lee Barrett, Charles Shire, and Alan Mandel. In the original script, the characters had different names, and the prize for completing the run was a new truck rather than $80,000. There was no Junior Justice character. The Bandit's car was not a Trans Am. The character later named Carrie was called Kate. Almost everything that became iconic about the finished film was added or changed in development. The Trans Am was Needham's idea. Before pre-production was complete, Needham spotted an advertisement for the soon-to-be-released 1977 Pontiac Trans Am. The image stopped him. He later described the car as a character in the film as much as any of the actors, and he was serious about that. The sleek black and gold two-door muscle car with its distinctive hoodbird decal was exactly the visual signature the Bandit needed. Needham approached Pontiac with a product placement proposal. He initially requested 6 cars for production use, knowing the stunt work and chase sequences would destroy most of them. Pontiac agreed to provide 4. All 4 were damaged significantly during production, with one largely destroyed during the jump over a dismantled bridge. That jump was performed by Needham himself, standing in for Reynolds, using a Trans Am equipped with a booster rocket, the same type of rocket Evel Knievel had used during his attempted Snake River Canyon jump in 1974. Pontiac sent Needham an invoice for the vehicles. The success of Smokey and the Bandit transformed the Trans Am into a cultural object. Sales of the Pontiac Trans Am increased dramatically following the film's release, and the car became the defining symbol of a specific kind of American freedom fantasy: fast, Southern, and unapologetically loud.
Is this fun?
Casting Smokey. Reynolds wanted a big name for the role of Sheriff Buford T. Justice, someone who could match his energy and hold the screen. He had Richard Boone in mind, but eventually felt the role needed someone a little more unhinged, a little funnier, and capable of sustaining comedy over a long pursuit.
And then on graduation day in grammar school, you know, they gave you those little gold pens. Yeah. And I used to play the kids for their gold pen.
He suggested Jackie Gleason. Gleason, whose career had defined American television comedy through The Honeymooners in the 1950s, agreed to take the part. His contribution went beyond the performance. Once on set, Gleason told Needham he could not be in the patrol car alone. He felt the character needed someone to play against, someone to absorb his frustration and give it an audience. Gleason's suggestion was to add a bumbling son to ride alongside Justice. That character, Junior, played by Mike Henry, was created entirely because Gleason asked for company. The relationship between Justice and Junior, with its mixture of contempt and dependency, became one of the film's most consistently funny running jokes. Reynolds had initially wanted someone a little crazier, a little more dangerous, and a lot funnier than his first candidate. Gleason was all 3. Reynolds' father, incidentally, had been a police chief in Riviera Beach, Florida, and Reynolds had mentioned to Needham that he knew a real-life law enforcement officer named Buford T., a name he had always found genuinely comic. That name went directly into the script.
Well, I am getting my clothes, you fool.
That's a good idea. Why don't you slip?
Sally Field almost didn't do it. Sally Field took the role of Carrie, the runaway bride who bolts from her wedding to Junior Justice and joins the Bandit on his run, for reasons she was candid about later. She had just come off the television film Sybil in 1976, which had generated serious critical praise for her performance.
And then I found the stage when I was 12 in the 7th grade. And it was a scene. I wasn't right for the scene, but I did it for the first time.
The response, she recalled, was along the lines of, "The work is extraordinary, but Sally Field is unattractive." Reynolds called her personally and asked if she would consider the role. She was taken aback that he called at all. There was essentially no finished script to read. What existed was closer to an outline with some scenes. Field described the experience of making the film as almost entirely improvised. The dialogue she delivered in the finished film was largely her own, created on the day and kept because it worked. She took the leap partly on the theory that if the bandit was supposed to find her attractive, audiences might believe it and somebody else might hire her afterward. Reynolds and Field began dating during production. Their relationship became one of the most visible in Hollywood through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, sustained by the on-screen chemistry the film generated and then maintained through sequels and additional projects together. Their pairing in Hooper, 1978, and Smokey and the Bandit 2, 1980, kept them working alongside each other even as their personal relationship eventually ended. Field later described Reynolds as being the reason she took several subsequent career risks, and the professional dynamic between them, whatever its personal complications, produced some of the most natural screen chemistry in American film of that decade.
Placing you under arrest for transporting alcoholic beverages across state lines without the proper permits.
How the film actually got released. Universal's plan for Smokey and the Bandit was modest. The studio had not budgeted for a wide national release and did not believe the film had mainstream crossover appeal. The initial strategy was to open it in drive-in theaters across the southern United States. The regional audience that the film's CB radio culture, country music, and southern setting were clearly aimed at. Drive-ins were still a significant part of the American exhibition landscape in 1977, particularly in the South, and they provided a low-risk proving ground for films the studios weren't sure about. The response at those initial southern screenings was extraordinary. Audiences packed the drive-ins, the word of mouth traveled fast, and Universal quickly recognized that what they had was not a regional B picture, but a genuine hit. The studio reopened the film nationwide. What had been planned as a modest regional release became a national phenomenon. The film grossed $127 million domestically against its $4.3 million budget, a return on investment that even blockbuster-era studios rarely achieved. It finished second in the 1977 domestic box office behind Star Wars. The film's position directly behind it in the rankings that year were Close Encounters of the Third Kind and The Spy Who Loved Me. Smokey and the Bandit outgrossed all of them, except Lucas's film.
She was.
What's she wearing now? Come back?
Hey!
The CB radio craze. Part of what gave Smokey and the Bandit its cultural grip in 1977 was timing. CB radio, Citizens Band radio, had exploded in American popular culture through the mid-1970s, partly driven by the 1973 oil embargo and the trucker strikes that followed it. Truckers used CB radios to coordinate around fuel shortages and speed traps, and the culture that developed around CB communication had its own vocabulary, its own codes, and its own mythology. The film landed directly into the middle of that world and amplified it for a mainstream audience. Smokey was CB slang for a highway patrol officer, the bear on the Smokey the Bear public safety campaign posters, whose distinctive campaign hat resembled those worn by state troopers. The Bandit and Snowman were CB handles, the pseudonymous identities truckers and CB enthusiasts used on the airwaves. The film's dialogue was loaded with the vernacular of the culture, and audiences who knew that vocabulary responded to it with the pleasure of recognition, while audiences who didn't know it picked it up from the film and brought it back to real life. CB radio sales, already high by the time the film was released, continued to climb through 1977 and 1978 before the craze peaked and began to fade. The film was a direct part of what sustained it. Jerry Reed's performance as Cletus Snow contributed enormously to the soundtrack's connection to that world. Reed was already an established country music performer and guitarist. He had charted throughout the late 1960s and 1970s, and his recording of Eastbound and Down for the film became one of the most recognizable songs associated with the era. The song hit number 2 on the Billboard country charts and crossed over to pop radio, giving the film a musical anchor that outlasted its theatrical run and embedded itself in the soundtrack of a specific American moment.
For Chief Justice, a distinguished officer of over 30 years seniority.
What made it work? Nothing about Smokey and the Bandit was meant to be profound. Hal Needham said so openly and said it without embarrassment. The film was conceived as 90 minutes of fun with no agenda beyond making audiences happy, and the honesty of that intention came through on screen in a way that audiences in 1977 responded to immediately.
So really, there was nothing to be scared of. I mean, what I told everybody when I got the job, I said.
Reynolds played the Bandit as a man who was effortlessly capable and effortlessly charming, with a smile that suggested he found the whole thing as enjoyable as the audience did. The fourth wall was not quite broken, but it was leaned against heavily. Reynolds had a rare quality that few actors possessed: the ability to communicate directly with a camera, to let an audience feel that he was sharing the joke with them personally. The Bandit worked because Reynolds was the Bandit. The gap between the performer and the character was essentially non-existent. Gleason's performance as Justice gave the film its structural backbone. Without a villain worth watching, a chase movie has nothing. Gleason played the sheriff as a man whose dignity was being systematically and publicly destroyed at every turn, and whose response to each indignity was a greater explosion of outrage than the last. The performance was broad, physical, and precisely calibrated. Junior's running incompetence alongside him gave the comedy a straight man to play against, which amplified Gleason's explosions rather than absorbing them. The two-man dynamic in the patrol car, the furious father, the helpless son, was a self-contained comedy machine that needed almost nothing from the script to generate laughs. The film also arrived at a specific moment in American cultural mood. The 1970s had not been an easy decade. Watergate, Vietnam, the oil crisis, stagflation. The country had been through a sustained period of institutional disappointment. A film about two men thumbing their nose at an absurd law pursued by an incompetent authority figure with a fast car and a beautiful woman and not a dark thought anywhere in sight landed differently in 1977 than it would have at any other time. Audiences were ready to root for the Bandit.
Robbing his baby kid alongside of what this dude is doing. Almost.
The sequels and the slide. The success of the original produced sequels, and the sequels produced diminishing returns in the manner typical of sequels that fail to understand what made the original work. Smokey and the Bandit 2 arrived in 1980 with the full original cast: Reynolds, Field, Gleason, and Reed, and Needham returning to direct. The plot involved transporting a pregnant elephant to the Republican National Convention. It grossed approximately $66 million domestically. Critics were less kind than they had been the first time, but audiences in reasonable numbers still showed up. Smokey and the Bandit Part 3 in 1983 was a different story entirely. Reynolds appeared only in a brief cameo at the end. The production had gone through a tortured development process. Early reports had suggested the film would be called Smokey is the Bandit, with Gleason's character somehow playing both roles. Jerry Reed was brought in to replace Reynolds as the Bandit after test screenings produced negative reactions to the original version. The result was a film that grossed $7 million against a $9 million budget. Gleason's justice, the one genuinely irreplaceable element, was present, but without Reynolds to pursue, there was nothing for the character to do.
Well, let's get going. Oh, whoa. Hold a minute. What? Can I ask you a question? Sure. Sit right there, Fred.
Reynolds' declining career and the film's fading. By the early 1980s, Burt Reynolds was still one of the most recognizable faces in American film, but the cultural tide was shifting. The kinds of films he made best, the car chases, the Southern Gothic comedies, the stuntman action pictures with Needham, were being replaced by a different kind of blockbuster. The Star Wars era had shifted audience expectations towards science fiction, fantasy, and larger-scale spectacle. The genre Reynolds had helped define had no obvious place in the new landscape, and his attempts to adapt, including the period crime film City Heat with Clint Eastwood in 1984, did not go smoothly. He sustained serious injuries on City Heat when a steel chair prop struck him in the jaw during filming, causing ongoing facial pain and resulting in a jaw condition that required extended medical treatment. The resulting weight loss and changed appearance generated rumors, widely circulated and ultimately untrue, about more serious illness. The rumors damaged his standing at a moment when he could least afford it, and several mid-1980s films, Stick, Stroker Ace, and Malone among them, failed to find audiences. Reynolds later said in interviews that the rumor cycle had been the most destructive thing that ever happened to his career.
Falls in love with you is not necessarily, as a matter of fact, a lot of the time can be the worst person to spend the rest of your life.
More so than any individual film failure. His television series, Evening Shade, ran from 1990 to 1994 and was well received, winning him an Emmy Award for Best Actor in a Comedy Series in 1991. But it was television, a significant distance from the kind of cultural dominance he had held in the late 1970s, when his face appeared on the cover of national magazines and his films reliably opened at number 1. The films that defined his peak, Smokey and the Bandit, The Cannonball Run, Hooper, were not the kind of films that attracted serious critical reappraisal as their stars aged. The auteur cinema of the same era, Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, received the critical attention and the retrospective recognition. The crowd-pleasing action comedies that had actually made enormous amounts of money were left behind, treated as symptoms of a moment rather than achievements of their own kind.
Safe as in your mother's womb here, darling.
Is that right?
The year 1977 and what got remembered. The single most consequential factor in Smokey and the Bandit's relative cultural obscurity is the film it finished behind in 1977. Star Wars did not simply become a successful franchise. It became a permanent institution of American popular culture, with yearly celebrations, extensive merchandise, devoted fan communities spanning multiple generations, and a continuing series of films spanning nearly 5 decades. Everything connected to Star Wars from 1977 onward has been studied, preserved, documented, and discussed continuously. The original film has been remastered, re-released, debated in academic papers, and analyzed in books that treat it as a cultural watershed. It earned that attention. Smokey and the Bandit had no such infrastructure. The CB radio culture that gave it part of its energy vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The CB craze that peaked in the mid-1970s faded sharply by the early 1980s as the novelty wore off. Cellular communication began its slow expansion, and the regulatory environment around trucking changed. The film's cultural markers, the Trans Am, the CB handles, the Coors beer, whose legal unavailability east of the Mississippi River was the entire premise, all belong specifically to 1977 in ways that resist updating or recontextualization. The film cannot be separated from its moment the way Star Wars has been, because its moment was its content. There is nothing universal about it, and that is precisely what makes it so completely of its time. There is also the matter of cultural geography. Smokey and the Bandit was and remains a Southern film in the deepest sense. Its setting, its humor, its music, and its values are rooted in a specific regional identity that American cultural criticism has often treated as something less than serious. The film has rarely been the subject of academic study or serious critical reassessment. It was reviewed at the time as light entertainment, treated afterward as nostalgia, and largely left there. The Coen brothers have said the film influenced them. Other directors have cited it, but the citations tend to be footnotes rather than the subject of the sentence.
We are apprised of the situation and are taking appropriate measures. Did you say you are a sheriff?
That's a big...
What remains? Reynolds received a late career recognition that acknowledged what had been overlooked for 2 decades. His performance in Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights in 1997 earned him a Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor and an Academy Award nomination. Critics who had spent years treating him as a commercial entertainer rather than an actor found a new vocabulary for understanding what he had always been doing on screen. He had never stopped working, but Boogie Nights gave him a second act that the industry paused to notice. He continued acting through the 2000s and 2010s, and his final film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was released posthumously, as he died in September 2018 at the age of 82 before the film's completion. Director Quentin Tarantino had cast him specifically as a tribute to the era of American filmmaking Reynolds had represented. Hal Needham, who never made another film with quite the cultural resonance of his first feature, was given an honorary Academy Award in 2012 by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in recognition of his lifetime contribution to stunt work and the physical cinema it produced. He was 82 years old when he accepted it, and he spoke at the ceremony about the gap between what stunt performers contributed to American film and what the industry had historically been willing to acknowledge. He died in October 2013. Jackie Gleason died in 1987. Jerry Reed, whose music gave the film much of its sound, and whose Snowman gave Reynolds' Bandit its best friend, died in 2008. Sally Field continues to work and is widely regarded as one of the finest American film actresses of her generation. The 1977 Pontiac Trans Am that Needham chose from a magazine advertisement became a cultural symbol that outlasted most of what surrounded it. Surviving examples from the production are still bought and sold at auction. The film that the car came from grossed more money in 1977 than Close Encounters of the Third Kind, more than The Spy Who Loved Me, and more than Annie Hall. It was seen by tens of millions of people who went home feeling like they had spent 90 minutes in exactly the right place. And then, slowly, the world moved on, and the Bandit was left behind. If this one took you back, hit the like button and subscribe. There are plenty more stories worth remembering.